Hello, I'm Roger Sutton, Editor-in-Chief of the Hornbook, and I'm here with my old friend Richard Peck on the occasion of his newest book, I'll show you, The Best Man. Richard, you and I met 30 years ago when your book, Remembering the Good Times, was published.
Yes.
So, and now we're back.
And now we're back and still at it. I guess this is about my 43rd book.
43rd.
Something like that. I started in 1971.
You know, one thing that interests me is that for a long time you were writing both novels for teenagers, mostly realistic fiction.
Yes.
Remembering the Good Times, for example, was a book about three friends, and there is a suicide in the book. Makes me sob uncontrollably, that book. Are You in the House Alone? Best YA title ever, about a babysitter. And at the same time, you were writing the Blossom Cult books, which were sort of fantasy, supernatural, historical fiction for younger kids.
Yes.
And so you had these two streams going. One were these realistic novels, and then down here you had historical fiction for younger people. And then you started concentrating mostly on historical fiction for younger people.
I did, yes.
But here in this book, The Best Man, we have those two streams of your work meet, where this is a realistic, contemporary set novel, but it's a book for and about younger kids.
Yes. And it's a very traditional storytelling story about a family.
Mm-hmm.
It is not as realistic as my early ones because 1971 was facing up to the realities that parents and schools weren't in the lives of the revolutionary generation. This is a much more gentle story.
Well,
No,
for you.
For me, yes. And there are no real villains in it because I wanted this book to be a hymn of joy. But I believe all fiction is family fiction. And I think that goes double for young people. They're looking for family. They are often trying to replace their own family with a pseudo-family of peer group friends. And all stories are family stories or the search for them. Even a novel called War and Peace is the story of a family. So, and this is the story of a 21st century family. So I'm on new territory, as you say.
I remember you and I had dinner with Rebecca Stead last year or the year before, and you were working on this, and the two of you were talking about how to write about the contemporary life of young people with their immersion in social media and devices when you and she, both grew up without any of that. And how do you insert yourself into that generational thing?
And these kids were in grade school.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not talking about teen Twitter, we're talking about kids going from first to sixth grade. It gave me 6 hard months of my life because I let it become a problem. I would say to parents, when does your kid have a phone for school? And they say, oh, about 5th grade. And I say to teachers, when do they have phones? They say, oh, they all got them in 3rd. So I wasn't getting much help. And one day I was saved. I realized I could play it for laughs. So I created a teacher. It's the most autobiographical character in this book. She's the homeroom teacher, and she's allergic to the computer. And every time she goes past it in the printer, it prints out hall passes for everybody. I just made a joke out of it. I should know to do that right at the beginning because there are some topics too serious to deal with seriously.
There's a funny joke early on when Archer, who's the hero, meets this girl at a wedding. The book opens with a wedding and closes with a wedding. And she saves him from something. And he says to her, don't save me again. And later, when we're allowed to have phones, don't text me.
And she says, deal. Yes. Mm-hmm. The thought of being saved by a girl is even worse than having to be a ring bearer in a wedding for a 6-year-old. Yeah. But then the techno problems came along very soon thereafter. We have to deal with this. We have to make sure that technology and instant communication do not destroy the necessary tension of a novel. If everybody knows everything, it's not a novel, it's Twitter.
I know. I'll even be watching TV, a show like 24 or something, some spy show, and you realize that if these people were actually using their cell phones, the story would be over in a minute.
Yes, yes. And then there is the annoyance. I was traveling in Iceland this winter, of all places, with people younger, and I would get a text in the morning when I was in bed, they saying, "We're in the dining room, are you coming down soon?" And I thought, you'll see me when you see me.
You ignore my text.
Yeah, completely. So that I have to deal with this if my characters are going to live in the 21st century. And I think humor, as in so many moments, is...
I was surprised. There's a moment in your book when the kids are in the 5th grade and there's an alert about a stranger on the premises of the school, and
Yes.
the children are instructed to get under their desks, which we've seen in some YA novels, and of course they're terribly tragic, but
Yes.
you actually are brave enough to play that for laughs.
Yes. Francine prose after. It's a serious subject that I had to handle it very carefully. I hope I handled it carefully enough. We'll find out. I took it from life, and that's always a problem, because real life doesn't fit into a novel. It can inspire, but it cannot include itself. But I got it out of the newspaper, as one does often. A dad was going to a school for a parent-teacher conference, and it was Friday afternoon, so he was wearing his National Guard fatigues. And when the secretary of this all-female school saw a man in full military uniform coming in the school, she pressed the panic button and shut it down. And I thought, that's it. That's the introduction for my character. Not a dad, but
Mr. McLeod.
Mr. McLeod, the student teacher who is reporting for duty on a Friday afternoon for his first conference, and he's wearing his fatigues. And so that gives the local TV affiliate, when they arrive with helicopters, the opportunity to say, and what is it like to cause a lockdown for wearing the uniform of your country? So that's a kind of a serious point. But it, again, humor, I hope, saves it, because it is a funny scene.
Well, it's brief. You move on from that
quick.
quickly.
It's quick, yes. And there's another thing about that scene. Dad's there. This is a story of this is a story about what a boy does in childhood, not adolescence. He looks for grown men to be. And the first man he looks for is his dad. Do I want to be him? My dad was the first man I looked at, and I said, did I want to be him? And the answer was yes.
Well, Archer has 4 men.
And he finally has 4. And I have to be aware that some of the intended readers don't have any. They've been robbed of men to introduce them to a world of grown-up men. They've been robbed by divorce, by the suburban commute, by aid to dependent children. And a book can't compensate for that. And I worried a little bit, will this book exclude them? I hope not. Also, I am concerned that the only man these kids know in this rather smug suburban school, the only man teacher they've ever seen in that school is a student teacher in 5th grade. So I think we need a lot more men in the early years of teaching, and literacy training than we have.
You've got fathers throughout your books.
Yes.
I mean, you even had a book called Father Figure.
Yes.
Why do you?
If the boy, if the protagonist is a boy, finally, when the book works free of me and starts telling itself, it just naturally goes in that direction of the father and the son.
Why?
I don't, well, it's deep in my heart. And I used to think, oh, here I go again, and I think
Can't help yourself.
No, and I don't think we can go often enough. And the mother, by the way, is in this story. This is a mother who is not she's not a father figure. She's a mother. Mm-hmm. She does have a daughter, and that's a funny side issue. But her relationship with her son is a very loving and easy one because they banter. Mm-hmm. She doesn't have to make the rules for him. He's got a dad. And so they have a nice relationship too. It's very idealized. Too few young people have two parents right there all the time, as I did.
Tell me about your dad.
My dad?
Mm-hmm.
He was home every night. And unlike the other dads, I could, as a little kid, I could go to work with him on the back of his Harley Davidson. Because,
there's a picture.
Yeah. No helmets, of course. I held on to his belt. And I knew not to let go. So.
What was his job?
He ran a Phillips 66 gas and oil, what we called then filling station. The phrase no longer exists, a service station. In the time when you washed the windshields and checked the air. And he ran it like a club where old men hung out, old men who had nowhere else to go. And I sat among them and they told me stories. They told me what it was like to ride the great wheel at the World's Fair of 1893 in Chicago. And it just burned into my heart. I thought, nothing that interesting will ever happen to me. And nothing did. So later, when I was old, I wrote a book called Fair Weather, about a farm family that gets to go to that fair and ride the Ferris wheel and see their first light bulb. But then all stories are about opening the door to a wider world. They have peer group leaders to lock them in. They need books to let them out. And the gym in a school is for peaking early, but the library is for getting ready. So in this book, the National Guard student teacher is amazed that they've been in school for 5 years and don't know anything. They don't even know directions, just the basics. Well, he's not going to preach about that. He's just going to teach it naturally, but he's amazed.
Well, even the teacher doesn't know how to do fractions.
No.
Right? And he has to take over at the blackboard.
No. And if I had to teach, I wouldn't know how to do fractions either. But yes, he's very competent. He is bringing in the skills of people who didn't have to take education courses. Mm-hmm. But he's having to take education courses to become certified as a teacher, and that's how we know him. And he creates a panic not just by coming in a uniform. He creates a panic by being the handsomest man who ever lived.
Well, and he has a dog with him.
What?
He has a dog with him.
For added...
He's perfect.
Just for added perfection, he brings what the newspaper calls an attack dog. Of course it's not an attack dog. It's a patrol dog that they are bringing out of Afghanistan and finding a home for. And he comes every day, and the dog becomes, of course, an extension of him, a very handsome dog and a very capable dog. He puts them in their seats every morning. How wonderful. Wouldn't you love to go to school and have a big, beautiful dog lead you to your chair every day? It's a very idealized story.
Well, I think that the whole book is very theatrical. Everything is heightened in that book.
Except anger.
Right. Although I want you to share that one scene
I'd
where
love
our
to.
student teacher really shows his stuff.
Yes. This is a defining moment in the novel. It's a little past the middle, I guess. And again, this is a perfect example of something that was taken from life and didn't work. Because a friend who is the mother of sons told me a story that inspired this. And I tried to write it unacrimoniously, but it needed teeth. So it's a man who is angry. And he's angry because of something that any kid in school will understand. He's angry about bullying. And it's the first time he's really seen it, and it unlocks him, and we see another side of him. A quiet, gentle boy named Russell Beale fails to turn up in class on the last day of 5th grade. And so the hero of our story, Archer, and a very capable boy he knows named Raymond Petrovich are sent by the teacher to go find the missing boy. We begin. Russell was in the restroom, watching the door when it opened. Both his hands were tied to a faucet with plastic clothesline. It was wrapped around and around. You could see how he tried to get loose. But what you really noticed was the word written across his forehead in pink Day-Glo magic marker. 3 big letters, gay. Russell knew what they'd written on him. He could read it backward in the mirror. The door opened behind me. It was Mr. McLeod, our student teacher. He started to speak, but Raymond showed him the word on Russell's forehead. It was beginning to blur, but it was there. You could feel the heat coming off Mr. McLeod. We hadn't seen him mad before. 6th graders, we said, and showed him the clothesline. Give it to me, Mr. McLeod said. He stuffed it in his pocket. They brought it from home. I'm not saying who they were, Russell said. His voice cracked and started to change right then. It was like this was the beginning of the end of being a kid for him. Something was on the floor by the toe of Mr. McLeod's boot. He picked it up. It was the pink Day-Glo magic marker. Shall we go see the 6th graders, he said to all of us. Let's do it, Russell said. The 6th graders were all over the place, girls in clumps at desks, guys up on the windows. They were waiting for their graduation party. When Mr. McLeod walked in behind the principal, every girl in the room screamed. My ears rang all day. Selfie sticks came out, phones they weren't supposed to have, everything. Their teacher went to get our teacher, Mrs. Stanley. She came in looking for Russell. When she saw him, in relief, she reached out. Here's my lost sheep, she said. I wasn't lost, Russell said. They came up behind me. The principal, Mrs. Dempsey, drew herself up. The 6th graders were wondering what this was about. Children, I know you envied the 5th graders the opportunity to learn from Mr. McLeod in Mrs. Stanley's class. This is your opportunity now to ask him anything you'd like to know. She was setting them up for something, but they didn't suspect. We're all gifted, but they were borderline. Whimpering came from some of the girls. Then a guy raised a casual hand. Dude, you ever shoot anybody? Mrs. Dempsey sighed. Mr. McLeod said, no, and I hope not to. I joined the National Guard because they'll pay for grad school. I want to be a teacher. It's my goal. The class thought that over, more or less. Phones flashed. Speak to these children about goals, Mrs. Dempsey said. We all need goals, Mr. McLeod said. Here's one. Stay away from people who don't know who they are, but want you to be just like them. People who will label you. People who will write their fears on your face. He let them think about that. Then he reached in his pants pocket and pulled out the yellow clothesline. They watched it coil in the air. Then he pulled out the magic marker. "Does anybody know who these belong to?" he said. He seemed to know someone would want to confess. It turned out to be a kid named Perry Highsmith, who was tight with two other kids, Aiden Cooper and Jeff Spinks. "And who would you be?" Mr. McLeod said. "Perry Highsmith," the kid said, surprised that everybody didn't know. It was no biggie. Perry looked away through his flop of hair. "It was just like some fun on the last day of school. It was our goal to have fun." He started to drop back into his chair. "Get up," Mr. McLeod said, and waited till Perry did. "What about the word?" "It was just a word," Perry said. "It was random." Mr. McLeod waited some more. "Gay," Perry muttered. A whispering sound made the rounds of the room. It started out a giggle and ended with a rumble at the back. "Gay's not a random word," Mr. McLeod said. "It's an identity. It's my identity." Silence fell. You could have heard breathing, but there wasn't any. Then one more time the girl screamed. It was ear-splitting.
I think that there's a really beautiful use of pathos and comedy in the way that that scene works.
Oh, I hope so. Because, as I say, it's the angriest scene in the book, and there is no other. Yes, there is another angry scene in the book among younger children. All the anger comes from bullying, because that's the kind of anger kids are having to live with now. They don't know about anti-same-sex marriage legislation in some other state, and they're not hearing about it. But they know about bullying, and they know how free the bullies are to act.
Sure.
As this boy is. He will, in fact, recur in the novel, because you don't vanquish him in a day. Yes, this novel is also a slightly subversive view of an American grade school in the kind of community, suburban community, that thinks so highly of its schools, and they're not that good. They're just not that good. And they aren't as good as they used to be. You notice the...
Get off my lawn.
Yeah. You notice the line he lays out? "We're all gifted, but they were borderline." That's what we do to kids. We tell them they're gifted because we're afraid not to. We don't want to discourage them, but then we don't give them any incentives. It's full of things from a boy's viewpoint, and they're slightly more sophisticated than a boy that age would notice, because this is a novel and not real life. But I hope they're phrased the way you would phrase them. Mm-hmm. What worries me is, what always worries me, and that is, I believe in the healing power of humor, and I believe humor is the best communicator. But my young readers don't. I get a letter every week from some kid somewhere who says, "Our teacher is reading your book to us, and she's just laughing and laughing." She's laughing. We're not. We didn't get it. Because they're not used to seeing humor on the page, and they're not used to humor being used to laugh at yourself, not someone else.
Well, I think that you're almost alone in that, in the way that you allow your books to really satirize the young.
Yes.
And that's rare, that so much is sympathy these days, and you
and if you
aren't completely prepared to
yeah.
offer that unreservedly.
No, I was a teacher, not a parent. I saw nobody's immune and nobody's perfect, and everybody is capable of selling himself out to the group. And parents just don't see that. They're not in the classroom. And I think a rounded portrait of the kid, it does him more honor and does her more honor than a sentimental one. But then there are some other aspects in this book that are pretty mature for young people. Why is Mr. McLeod really angry when he says of the rope they tied the boy with, "Give it to me. They brought it from home"? Would they understand that? It's a teachable moment. What he's saying is, they planned this. This is a premeditated crime. That needs some teaching, and a teacher who understands the line. But if you write just what they already know, it's a textbook, a graded reader.
How do you avoid that in dealing with a loaded topic? Loaded in terms of, we read about it in the newspapers and people are demonstrating, and if you have a hot button issue like gay marriage, which this book is partly about, how do you do that in a way that does not push readers away? Or starts preaching?
There's the problem, preaching. Because if you're going to do it with humor, that's another draft, and a draft worth writing. As you know, I'm all too prone to preaching. One way of working with that is always making sure the narrator is a young person, not third person. I try to keep myself off the stage and off the page. So we have two voices here. Archer, who is a more realistic grade school boy, who perhaps undervalues himself a little, as boys I think are inclined to do, and his somewhat overconfident female friend, Lynette. And she gets to say things that he wouldn't. Mm-hmm. He is looking for grown men to be. She's looking for a bigger vocabulary to throw around. So she gets to use all these words that my readers don't know, but that are apt for the story. So all of these stratagems of getting somebody else to tell it is one way to deal with the hot button issue. The other two is always to remember, you want them to live in a wider world. You want them to learn about this. I wrote this book on the day same-sex marriage began to be implemented in the state of Illinois. That's one reason why it's set there. And now it's the law of this land, though not others.
I'm wearing my wedding suit for the occasion.
Right. And an issue here is, I wrote it because I believed that this landmark legislation that has changed the way adult people live and can live is not being mentioned in school. It's not in the textbook yet. It's not on the standardized test. Is it being discussed by the teacher who said, by the way, history is happening when you are old people? You need to remember you were alive when this happened.
And I think that it's a great point to say that gay marriage is not just something that happens to the people who now can and desire to get married. It's something that's happened to us as a country.
Yes, because everybody has family. And anybody who objects to discussing this issue is overlooking members of their own families.
Did you find as a gay person that you brought a particular perspective to the story?
I think I did, because when I was coming into the world as an adult long ago, you could go to prison for that. And now my friends are younger than I am, and they came into a world in which you could die of AIDS because of that. And that was these were our first views of who we were and what we were thought to be. And now in the 21st century, something wonderful has happened. we're going to need a strong country to keep it, because it's not going to happen in Putin's Russia or sub-Saharan Africa or the Islamic world or Castroite Cuba. And will they evolve in time? No, probably not.
I'm surprised we evolved so quickly.
Isn't it amazing?
I mean, if you think back to the 70s, even the 80s, you know, things did get better for us, but no one was talking about marriage. And
no, it
just seemed
wasn't.
to-
Yeah, it was. It goes beyond the goal, doesn't it? It happened. But it's also a history lesson, and that is history doesn't move at a steady pace. One day you wake up and the world is in a different place, living in a different era. We in New York remember it. I mean, some of us in New York remember it well. On September 11th, we woke up and nothing in our lives worked anymore. We woke up one day on a beautiful September morning, and everything was changed. And it's a bad time.
And I mean, I wonder what it will be like for gay kids today who grow up and having the possibility of getting married like everybody else in front of them for their whole lives. I mean, we came to it as old men. It happened.
And we can't assume that this is big news. And I didn't write the book as if it's big news, because it's already old news. The intended readers of this book don't remember 2014. Mm-hmm. And we certainly hope that the book will stay in print so that it will be even more remote in time. But they need to know this is the way American people live. So how to do it with kids. This wasn't going to be a book about I have two dads or I have two moms. Mm-hmm. There were books like that. But I couldn't find a book for grade school and middle school, not high school, that discussed gay marriage as an option that everybody has. So it's not a landmark book, it's not militant, we're not on the barricades, the battle's over.
No, it's not an argument about why we should or whether we should have gay marriage. That's all been accomplished in this book.
It's what is. And when a book, and it's also, sometimes people want you to write a different book. And it's not about discovering one's own sexual identity.
Right.
Because the boy's younger than that.
Right, who knows?
He hasn't quite hit puberty, sad to say. He thinks he's the last one, because we always thought that. And he isn't at puberty. And puberty, like old age, is its own sex. So it's not about who am I. And the one time he says to the uncle, "You think I might be gay?" It's passed off as something light, because that's not something somebody else tells you.
What is it that Archer says when Uncle Paul tells him that he's gay? There's a great sentence. Uncle Paul says, "Did you know I was gay?" Mm-hmm. And Archer says something
You knew I was gay, right?
You knew I was gay, right? And Archer says, "Yes." No.
He says, "Sure, I guess, maybe." No! And later, in another scene, he often takes things to his mother, which a girl wouldn't do, I think, but he does. He does it with a lovely naivete, and she receives it. By the way, she's a concerned parent. Everything he tells her about school drives her berserk, but she tries not to overreact. But she does mention, "My taxes support that school." But he says something that I think is valid. He said, "I found out that Uncle Paul told me that he is gay." And his mother says, "Well, we thought you would know when you were ready to know." And he says, "Mom, I know when somebody tells me.
Poor Archer. Some people are like that. Even Lynette teases him when he announces to her that Mr. McLeod is gay.
Yeah, but you can't. We can't prove she really knew.
Do you think maybe she was just pretending to know?
She always
Certainly
has to know more than he does.
But can you imagine, if you think back to those gay-themed YA novels of the 70s, like Trying Hard to Hear You, the Sandra Scapitoni book, or John Donovan's I'll Get There, It Better Be Worth the Trip, there was no humor in those books.
No.
And it very much was about dramatic revelation and then a car crash. Of
Yes.
course, that was the cliche of the era. And this book to me seems so revolutionary in its funny, quiet way. Have you seen there's a television ad, and I can't remember what the product is for, but it shows these two handsome young men getting out of a limo, and they're clearly going into a church to be married. They have boutonnieres and things, and they're walking up the steps, all excited, arm in arm, and there's this church lady standing there and says something like, "I will not have you besmirch this church." And the boys start getting ready to be all militant. And then she pulls out a stain remover from her pocket. She says, "There, go on in. Congratulations, boys."
I have a scene like that in this movie. The grandmother whom the mother who is her daughter-in-law, plays as a heavy, isn't. But she says, "I understand you want to marry Paul Archer," and he says, a little intimidated, "I do." and he said, "Yes, I do. I want to." And she said, "And who is planning this event?" And he said, she said, "What man could ever plan a wedding, let alone his own? You can leave that to me." And so I had that scene.
Well, we've got to have a trademark Richard Peck indomitable old lady, right?
Of course, a tough old lady.
Very.
Yes, and this one is president for life of the League of Women Voters. So, yeah. And
Don't mess with her, boys.
And she is a woman who loses the love of her life in this book. And she remembers being young. She's younger than I am. She remembers being young in the 70s and being married in a field of daisies, barefoot. And so she too carries out the motif of marriage and the wedding scene, because she remembers when she was young in the 70s, and it is sustaining her now that she's lost her partner.
And we see then with that, marriage is something for everybody.
Yes.
It brings together two people, but it also brings together a family, and it can bring together a community at the same time.
Yes, it can, and make a community. And be an occasion for joy, not a car crash.
Hallelujah. Thank you, Richard. It's a beautiful book.
Thank you.